Welcome back. You're watching On the Money with me, Liam Halligan, from Tory Party conference in Manchester. Now, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has been speaking to me about her economic vision for Britain.
Lots of people said that we would never get those deals, that because we were only one country rather than 28, we'd get worse terms. In fact, we got at least as good terms as the EU did. And in fact, in the case of Japan, we got better terms. We got a new agreement on digital and data. We got better mobility arrangements for people travelling to Japan with their spouses. So we were able to go above and beyond what the EU negotiated. And in the case of Australia, which was our first from scratch post-Brexit trade deal, we did the deal within a year. And the EU is still negotiating after 4 years. And there's even talk that, various countries in the EU might not do it. So I think what it shows is that as an independent trading nation, we can be more nimble in the way that we approach these things, more flexible, and we can act in the interests of the United Kingdom. And that's what I want to do with foreign policy overall, is focus on where we can secure those economic partnerships, those security partnerships, to benefit people at home in the UK, but also bringing our philosophy more broadly around the world.
There's been a lot of focus inevitably on our relationship with the US. The US accounts for about a fifth of our trade overall. We don't have a trade deal with the US. The EU doesn't have a trade deal with the US. You're now saying that a trade deal with the world's biggest economy isn't the be-all and end-all. Why do you think that?
Well, my successor, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, is negotiating trade deals with India, which is a very exciting, fast-growing market. She's negotiating with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is worth $9 trillion. And those are some of the fastest growing parts of the world. So we've got to think, where do we want Britain to be positioned in 2030, 2040, 2050? We want us to have economic and security partnerships with our friends and allies around the world. I call it the network of liberty, sharing our values, sharing trade, and also preventing those developing countries from having to do infrastructure deals or trade arrangements with authoritarian regimes. So that's a really important principle.
You've said that as we strike out and forge new free trade agreements as an independent country, we've got to dump the baggage of previous debates, and you say that many naysayers have thinly veiled vested interests. Who are the naysayers and what vested interests are you talking about?
Well, I think when the economy moves forward, there are always industries who might not want new competition. They might not want the innovations that come from overseas. They might be fearful. But I think they're wrong to be fearful, because I think...
Are farmers wrong to be fearful?
I think they are. Because fundamentally, I think we produce some of the best food in the world. I think there's more and more demand for it. There's particularly demand in Asia Pacific. So 25% of all of the world's meat imports will be from those trans-Pacific countries I was talking about. And what are people going to want to buy as they get richer? They're going to want to buy high-quality British produce. They're going to want to buy British financial services. They're going to want to buy British technology. So it's in our interest to be more open to those opportunities.
You're a former Chief Secretary to the Treasury. You said recently, we know from our history in post-war Britain, a bigger state ultimately leads to worse outcomes for everybody. We've now got the highest tax burden since the Second World War. Have we reached the limit of taxation in this country?
Well, the best way to get our tax burden down is to grow the economy, and we need to absolutely go for growth. We need to reform the planning system, which Michael Gove is now leading on. We need deregulation, which Lord Frost is doing a lot of work on. We need more trade deals, which Anne-Marie Trevelyan is working on. And we need to turbocharge the British economy. We are now, I think, one of the fastest growing economies in the G7. But there's always more to be done, because my view is that it's enterprise that's going to help us recover from COVID. And we need to reduce the restrictions on enterprise and help it thrive.
Of course, you want to grow, and that lowers total debt as a share of GDP.
And it lowers the tax burden as a proportion of GDP, and it lowers spending as a proportion of GDP.
But the economy's stalling. I mean, the tax burden could go up a little bit before it goes down, despite what you, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor want.
Well, none of us can predict the future. Even you, Liam, don't have a crystal ball about what's going to happen. But I am optimistic about Britain's prospects. I do think we're in a new position. We're in an unfrozen moment where we can do things differently. And I want to encourage all of us across the government to be bold in the next year or so about what we can do differently to really shift the dial and really unleash the ingenuity of British business and the British people.
Isn't there a danger that the costs of net zero fall disproportionately on poorer households, on poorer firms? I mean, ahead of COP26, the government's putting this front and centre, the net zero agenda, but there are concerns now about the costs.
But as I said in my speech earlier, the way to get to be greener is to be wealthier. And the way to get the innovation we need to tackle climate change is through opening up our economy, exchanging ideas, new innovations. I'm a big supporter of new nuclear. I think the small modular reactors are going to be really important to the energy solution.
Like the ones being developed by Rolls-Royce.
Exactly, which I went to visit a few weeks ago and I think are a brilliant opportunity. So we need to turbocharge that innovation and investment.
So what do you think we've learnt from the recent energy crunch?
Well, I think we've learnt how important HGV drivers are to our economy, and I think it's good that people are being paid more to do those important jobs. The industry assure us that there is the petrol available at the refineries and the terminals, but obviously it's important to the British economy.
You've said yourself that both your parents were to the left of Labour, if I remind you of that, and you were a student Liberal Democrat. Now you're founding the Free Enterprise group of MPs. You're very much a pro-business Foreign Secretary. Where does that come from? Where does your political sense of direction come from?
From a very early age, I haven't liked being told what to do, and I always wanted to forge my own path. And my fundamental view is that everyone should have that opportunity. And what I hate to see is people's talents being wasted or them being ignored for whatever reason. And I do believe in personal freedom. I think it's a really important basis of a successful society. And ultimately, I believe that is why countries like the UK and our allies will be successful in the long term, because without that freedom of speech, those freedom of ideas, the freedom to set up and succeed in a business, I don't think there is a long-term future.
Since the Brexit referendum, you have been front and centre in terms of implementing that referendum during the dogfights in the House of Commons. As Trade Secretary, you've really been at the forefront of making Brexit work. So why is it that you campaigned for Remain? You could have a reasonable discussion. Good people are on both sides of that debate. I was really concerned it became as almost sectarian as it's become. But what was it that put you on the Remain side before the people spoke and you put your back into implementing Brexit?
I certainly would vote Leave now if I have my chance again, because I think it has enabled us to be more flexible and more nimble and take more control of our own decisions. And at the time, there were various concerns that have frankly been disproven about the economy in particular. But I've always been somebody that's been sceptical of a European superstate because, I said earlier, I want to have control of my own life. I want Britain to have control of its own destiny.
How concerned are you about China? Just this weekend, we've seen incursions of Chinese military planes into Taiwanese airspace to a greater extent than we've seen for a long time. That's got to concern the UK, right?
Well, what I want to do is make sure that we are building alliances with our friends and allies, economic alliances in particular, because what we need to make sure is developing countries are not exposed to large infrastructure investments or trade that ultimately come with strings attached from authoritarian regimes. The best way to deal with authoritarian regimes is to increase the economic strength of the UK and its allies. Of course, we need to trade with China, but that trade has to be reliable, and it can't come with the strings attached, whether it's violation of intellectual property rights or forced technology transfer. I think that's really important.
This weekend, the Taiwanese premier has accused China, quotes, of damaging regional peace. He's right, isn't he?
Well, we need to make sure that that region remains peaceful, and the point I was making about working with our allies to support improved security, I think the AUKUS agreement is a great example of this, making sure the Australians have access to those nuclear-powered submarines will help protect peace in the region, and that's fundamentally important.
But I think a lot of people look at that region, look at the South China Sea, they see tensions rising. The Royal Navy was in the region this week, and as you well know, almost as a direct response to those Chinese military planes. I mean, how far does China have to go until we start becoming a little bit more belligerent, at least in our rhetoric?
I am not a fan of rhetoric, which is divorced from practical politics. What we have to do, and this is why, why the economy is important, why trade is important, why infrastructure investments are important, why security agreements are important. It's important that we work with our allies. Britain is not going to be able to deal with the global issues that we face, and these are challenging times. Britain is not going to be able to deal with that alone, but what we can do is work with like-minded friends and allies. I've talked about the United States. We want to do more with India on security. We want to do more with the Asia-Pacific region. There are countries like Mexico that are part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And building up and working with our allies is the way to protect global peace in the future.
Two final questions, Foreign Secretary. The first one is, you spent quite a lot of your childhood in Leeds, I know, not so far away from where we are in Manchester. How crucial is levelling up to the ongoing success of this government, and do you think it's going fast enough?
It's vitally important. It's absolutely vitally important. It's why people voted for us, because they were fed up of being told that their area was in decline. And they believe in our Prime Minister to turn things around, to bring more opportunities across the country. And for me, enterprise is a really important part of levelling up. There are fewer firms that export in the north of England and around London. There are fewer investments from overseas, and those investments, those exporting jobs, will give us more opportunities. So we are very focused on delivering on that.
And finally, you've disclosed the bombshell that Sean Connery is your favourite James Bond.
I think you knew that already, actually.
So you'd never countenance the idea of a female James Bond?
Well, as I said, Liam, I'm not available at the moment, so Sean can fill in.
Secretary of State, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.